All right. Good afternoon, YouTube. I want to continue on right now with my religious studies series because I think it's been about 3 months since I went over this. I have Judaism Part 1, Judaism Part 2. I'm going to finish Judaism out really quick and then move right over into Christianity. So it's a lot here. Well, not a whole lot. I mean, I really covered the basics, okay, for Judaism. Thank you to those who have subscribed to my channel. So let's get into the, now you see my textbook, okay? This is from the textbook that I use for those that are new, that I used when I was a professor of religious studies at Cuyahoga Community College and Lakeland Community College. Here it is. Okay. Experiencing the World's Religions, Tradition, Challenge, and Change by Michael Malloy. And it is the 5th edition. And yes, I continue to use it because you see how much I use the book. Okay, but I like it. All right. It surprised. Look at this and how I keep everything together. I don't know because this book has gone many a places. Okay. And I mean in this condition, all right, but I managed to keep all of it together. All right. So anyway, we're just going to get into this real quick, finish it out, basic coverage, okay, because the foundation, okay, and the basic tenets and how it got started, so on and so forth, which is what this religious studies series was all about, has been covered, okay. So Jewish belief, there is no official Jewish creed, but there is a set of central beliefs. Belief in, one is belief in God. God is one, formless, all-knowing, and eternal. God is master of the universe as its creator and judge. God is both loving and just. As far as God is concerned, okay, I believe I talked about it in Judaism Part 1. Okay, it is monotheistic now. It was not always monotheistic. If you read, as you read the Old Testament, it's very clear that it's not monotheistic. It is henotheistic. That's been covered in, I believe, my first video in the religious studies series, the first or second one. The second belief is belief in the words of the prophets. Okay, you find that in Part 1 and Part 2. I think I posted it to my community wall, but if not, you can look in my playlist under religious studies series. Bullet point 3, belief that God gave the law to Moses. That's been covered. 4, belief that the Messiah, the Savior to be sent by God, will come someday. Hasn't come yet. And 5, belief that there will be a resurrection of the good in the world to come, in quotes. Okay, there's no universal agreement about the precise meaning of the Messiah, the resurrection of the good, or the world to come. Okay, or the world. Let me say it again. There's no universal agreement about the precise meaning of the Messiah, the resurrection of the good, or the world to come. Okay. In the past, they were understood literally. The Messiah would be a heaven-sent, powerful leader who would inaugurate a new age. At that time, the deceased who had followed God's laws would come back to life. Some Jews no longer interpret these beliefs literally, but see them symbolically of the ultimate triumph of goodness in the world. Okay, in Judaism, human beings have a special role. They're created in God's image. They have the ability to reason, to will, to speak, to create, and to care. They have the responsibility to manifest these divine characteristics in the world. They believe that among human beings, they have a special role, a role that some believe is to witness the one God and to do his will in the world. Others believe that their role is to suffer for a purpose known only to God. Others have said that their role is to bring a sense of justice to the world that often has none. There is no agreement about the Jewish role. There is a general consensus among Jews that they hold a unique place in the world. You know, when we hear people say that the Jews are God's chosen people, right? There is great pride in knowing that they have contributed so much to world culture, which I know I covered that it's either in Part 1 or Part 2. Okay, they have the religious practices. All right. It is a way of living. Okay, to be a Jew is a way of living. not only holding a set of beliefs. Judaism, some scholars explain that Judaism is less interested in orthodoxy, correct belief, and more interested in orthopraxy, which is correct practice. The Ten Commandments are at the heart of Jewish morality. We talked about the Ten Commandments, I believe, in part 2. They direct behavior. There are many additional laws and specific customs that dictate how time is to be used, what foods are to be eaten, how prayer is to be conducted, which you find these things in many other religions, probably most of them. I don't want to say all, I don't know every single one. All right. But those would seem like the basics that are covered. And I could probably dare say, based off the definition of religion that we went over in part 1 of the series on what is religion. Judaism promotes congregational worship, and many of the celebrations are done in their home. Of course, the Jews have the Sabbath, which is central to all forms of Judaism, which is the seventh day of the week. When kept properly, the Sabbath is felt to sanctify the entire week. Recalling the royal rest of God after the 6 laborious days of creation, the Sabbath is a day of special prayer and human relaxation. In earlier times, before watches and clocks, a day began in the evening at sundown. Thus, the Jewish Sabbath begins on Friday at sunset and lasts until Saturday at sunset. I remember when I went to Israel twice. The first time I went, I stayed for 7 days. The second time I went, I stayed for 2 months. And that Sabbath, on the Sabbath day, it was the whole entire state of Israel. It was like dead silent. Just, if there was any movement, it was like a must. But, people would just literally do nothing, okay, all day until the sunset on Saturday, all day, like lay in the bed, nothing, things that they, and would fast. At least the people that I stayed with did. Things that they would, the people that I stayed with would drink tea. Okay, and let me tell you, all the fruit and everything was just so ridiculously good. And the fruit was so sweet and juicy. It was just ridiculous how good it was. Fresh. They would prepare it the night before, or the day before, rather. Okay. The traditional purpose of the Sabbath was a compassionate one to allow everyone, even slaves and animals, regular rest. And that's what they did. They took their whole time to rest. Traditionally, fires could not be built on the Sabbath because of the labor involved. So food would have to be cooked beforehand or eaten uncooked. Shops would be closed. And here, I live in an area where I live right around the corner. It's a high, population, Jewish population, and they have their stores and everything, and it's just the same, Orthodox Jews, their stores, everything is closed on that day, on their Sabbath. We do see them going to their Shabbat service. The purpose is to separate the everyday world of labor from the one day of the week in which everyone can enjoy leisure, and to give you the rest that you need to prepare for the next week. It is meant to be joyous and is often remembered that way by adults who have grown up in traditional households. Let me see. During the Jewish exile in Babylonia, which we went over in part 2, synagogue study and worship became a regular way to mark the Sabbath. It is common for religious Jews today to attend a synagogue service on Friday night or Saturday morning. Like I said, I see them going to their services. They speak with pride of their observance of the Sabbath. Really, it's, I just think it was hard for me when I was there, especially for 2 months, to every single Saturday not do anything. Everybody in the house would just be laying in the bed. You know what I'm saying? That was difficult for me because I'm coming from a Western culture. It's just constant moving. Even I grew up you know, uh, where even on the weekend, you're going busy, going Monday through Friday to school, to work, have a few hours when you get home to eat, do whatever homework or whatever needs to be done. Parents cooking, okay, preparing for the next day, to go to bed, to do it all over again the next day. And then here comes Saturday. Well, because you work until 5, and generally things would close at 5. At least back then. I kind of still think so today. Some things back then would close at 3. Some things have been kept open a little later because of that. But what would we do? Saturday folks would be running around trying to take care of the things that they couldn't take care of during the week, because of the packed schedule. And then for me, growing up, I grew up in church. So Sunday morning we had to get ready for church. So it was you really didn't often have, and that, just perpetuated throughout my life, just that way of living. So, and I think that's for a lot of people in Western culture. So you just didn't have that day of a complete day of rest. So when I went there, I think maybe about the 4th or 5th Shabbat, I was kind of rolling with it, but it was hard. Okay. So let's keep on going. They point out that the great gift of Judaism to the world has not been the creation of a beautiful people in physical space, but the creation of a beautiful temple in time. They were once called lazy by the Romans for stopping their work one day out of every 7, but the practice has triumphed, and one day of the week is generally set aside as a day of rest throughout the world. Now we have their holy days. Their regular calendar is lunar, meaning that each month begins with a new moon. Because of a year of 12 lunar months lasts 354 days, one lunar year is 11 days shorter than one solar year. So in the Jewish calendar, an extra month is added approximately every 3 years. The Jewish New Year is Rosh Hashanah. That recalls the creation of the world and occurs during autumn in the 7th lunar month. This celebration allows people to consider their obligations and to pay off their debts. It is preceded by a month of daily blowing of the shofar, a ram's horn, which produces a solemn tone of warning to remind people that they stand before God. All right, 10 days later, this is the most sacred day of the year, which is Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. To atone means to make up for one's faults. This day has traditionally been kept by prayer and strict fasting with no food or drink during the entire day. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are called the high holy days, and otherwise quite secular Jews frequently keep them in some way, refraining from work or school, and attending synagogue. The entire period is called the Day of Awe because of the mood of solemn judgment. Then not long after that, you have a joyous harvest called the Sukkot, which means shelter or booths. In the early days, it was common for families to sleep outdoors in the field during the autumn harvest season, which enabled them to work the fields early, to stay late, and to protect their harvest. The small sleeping shed that was traditionally used later became part of the celebration, and eating or sleeping in the shelters came to symbolize the period of wandering in the desert before the Israelites entered the land of Canaan, which was covered as well in either part 1 or part 2 of my series. Then you had Hanukkah, the Feast of Dedication, which is an early winter festival full of joy. It is a welcome celebration during the growing gloom of winter. Each day over an 8-day period, one more candle is lit on a 9-branched candelabrum, a special form of menorah, until at the end of the festival all are lit. This commemorates the time in 165 BCE, when after a period of desecration by the Syrian forces of Antiochus IV, the second temple was rededicated. Then you have the late winter feast before spring, which is Purim. It recalls when the Hebrews in danger of annihilation in Mesopotamia in the book of Esther. Then you have the week-long festival of Passover or Pesach, which occurs in the first lunar month and may have originally began as a springtime nature festival of renewal. It is to recall the Hebrews' exodus from from Egypt, and to symbolize their liberation. The blood of the lamb was killed for the Passover meal, as the book of Exodus relates, was placed over the doors of the Hebrews. We went over that too. Okay, I'm thinking part 2. Keeping the angel of death from entering their homes while the power of God passed over Egypt. Passover, all right? The most significant event of Passover is the memorial meal, the Seder, or order, in which the Jews eat several symbolic foods. The bread is a thin flat bread called matzah, made without yeast, recalling how there was no time for the bread to rise and the Hebrews rushed to leave Egypt. Then they have the shank bone of lamb or other animal, which represents the sacrificial lamb. They have a salad of nuts and fruits, which recalls the mortar used by the Hebrews in their forced labor. All right. All right. Let me see. After Passover, you have Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, because it occurs at the end of a week of weeks, 50 days after Passover. Okay. It gained a special religious meaning as an invitation to renew the covenant. It was believed that God gave Moses the 10 Commandments at that time of year. 9 weeks after Shavuot, there's a day of fasting that recalls the destruction of the two temples called Tisha B'Av. I hope I pronounced that right. Okay. All right. Moving on. Then we have the Jewish dietary practices. Kosher means ritually correct. It applies to food preparation and consumption. In regard to meat, all blood must be drained before the meat is cooked and eaten, because blood, which gives life, is sacred to God. Okay. Pork and shellfish are forbidden, as seen in Leviticus 11. Okay. Now, probably because the animals were considered scavengers and easily contaminated by what they ate, not necessarily because it was some, anything immoral necessarily about eating that particular thing, that particular meat. Okay. But because it was just dangerous. All right. Pork sometimes contains a parasite which can be killed only by cooking at high temperatures. Also, meat and dairy products may not be mixed or eaten together at the same meal. That's keeping the household kosher. So they have separate cooking implements, pans, dishes, utensils, one for meat, one for dairy products. Some households have separate sinks, separate refrigerators. Okay. These practices derive from a rule of uncertain food that forbids the cooking of a baby goat or lamb in its mother's milk in Exodus 34:26. It is possible the practice was forbidden for being cruel. Some fetal animals cut from the womb before birth were considered tender delicacies. When I was in seminary, I had to take Judaism, and we had a rabbi, Orthodox, and he invited us to his home for the Sabbath, for the Shabbat, where the meal before we were able to eat. And it was cold, okay, because you couldn't warm it up, okay, because it was after sundown. And then we went to the synagogue rather with him, okay. It was nice, it was interesting, okay. And I've gone to other synagogues because I had to for classes and whatnot. And when I taught religious studies, I would have the students go. They could choose whether they wanted to go to Orthodox synagogue or not. All right, but that was a part of, and I would join them. In my early days teaching, I would join them. As time went on, I couldn't because it was just too many classes and too many people. They have regular daily prayer. They pray regular daily prayer by devout Jews. They pray dawn, noon, and dusk. And private prayer is often done at bedtime as well. Okay. They pray in the morning during the week. Males use the tefillin or phylacteries. You see that those are the two small the boxes containing scriptural passages. One is attached to the forehead by leather straps around the head. I'm sure some of you have seen that and wondered what it was. Others is attached to the upper left arm by straps wound down around the arm and hand. Okay, what does it signify? Literally, that God's law is in the mind and the heart of the person at prayer. The talit, which is a prayer shawl, okay, which they wear. I'm sure many of you've seen the Orthodox Jews wearing those. In your less traditional forms, the prayer shawl sometimes isn't used, but the men wear the kippah, okay, or the yarmulke. Okay, it's kippah in Hebrew, yarmulke in Yiddish, the old language of Eastern European Jews. Yiddish is the old language of Eastern European Jews. Devout males sometimes express their reverence before God during their waking hours by covering their heads continually with a skull cap. All right. They have a mezuzah, which is placed on the doorstep of the entrance to a home and sometimes on the doorposts of interior homes. Okay, I don't know if you can kind of see that right there. All right, I'm sure some of you all have seen that before. All right. Now, sexuality and the origin of life are considered very sacred, and they have some practices relating to them. 8 days after birth, when a male receives his name, he is circumcised. The foreskin of the boy's penis is cut off by a specialist. The ceremony recalls God's covenant with the Hebrew people in Genesis 17 and Leviticus 12:3. The origin of the practice of circumcision in Judaism, okay, it's not originated with them. But the practice, the origins of it is uncertain. Maybe began as a healthy measure to prevent infection, okay, brought about by hot climates. Okay, but it was possible that circumcision began as a way of recognizing divine control over sex and generation. Males mark puberty with a coming of age ceremony at 13, and this is called a bar mitzvah. Okay. 13 is when a man legally becomes an adult in Judaism, or, in quotes, son of the commandment. Now, in some branches of Judaism, girls between the ages of 12 to 18 are honored in their own ceremony called a bat mitzvah. There are, for women, menstruation and childbirth have been considered special times, celebrated with a ritual bath, mikvah, and purification. All right. Okay, now, some culturally based divisions. You have your Sephardic Jews. Okay, they come from a mythic land of Safar, once thought to exist in the distant west of Israel, and often identified in Spain. You have your Ashkenazic Jews, okay, who were descendants of Noah, who settled in a distant northern land. All right. Then you have some other Jewish cultures here. You have Orthodox Judaism. Okay. All right. And I'm not going to go through all of this. Conservative Judaism, Reform Judaism, and Reconstructionist Judaism. You can look it up. All right. All right. And that ends Judaism. Next, we are going to get into, as you can probably see, Christianity. Okay, and then Islam. But first, Christianity. You all be blessed. Peace.